Hello there. We're in Germany and we're in a town called Ochsenfurt, about 11,000 population, I think, so a good size, the kind of place you can spend a good day. A medieval town with large parts of its original stone wall. People often ask why I get so obsessed by these old medieval towns. It's because of images like this. This is a painting back from the 1623s. And it shows it in its original condition before the modern world. And there's something just so amazingly charming about a town which is sort of self-contained, fortified and protected with towers around it. It's kind of there's a romanticness to it, although of course it was all done for purely practical and protectionist reasons to protect the townsfolk from who knows what outside of those gates at night. And there's something just really kind of dramatically exciting about that to me. That's old Europe's such a wonderful place to draw because it's so steeped in history. Now this is a good example. This is called the New Town Hall, the Neues Rathaus. And this new building was started in 1497, completed in 1513. So, wowza. And it has this crazy clock tower with these little animatronic things from way back, hundreds of year old little performance that happens by this clock tower. It's just such an amazingly otherworldly experience, and it's real. It's almost, you can see where Disney gets a lot of their ideas from, or did back in the day. There's something wildly charming about it, and yet completely original. So, wanted to do a drawing, looking around the square on an incredibly hot summer day, and there's one little tiny cafe with one table free in the shade, and that's the view I've got. So perfect, as if the sketching gods are kind to me today. So I chose a grey sheet of paper, and I've decided that I'm exploring at the moment, starting with brushes rather than pens, just to kind of break any rhythms. If you've watched any of my videos before, I don't like to have a fixed sort of method, although I suppose I'm kidding myself. I probably have 3 or 4 or 5 fixed methods that I vary and bring variations to, because that's part of the pleasure I get from drawing. Part of the pleasure is to sort of surprise myself and just throw myself into the experience. If a drawing doesn't work, I could throw it away. It's just a drawing. So I can sort of play and enjoy the act of playing. So here I am sitting in a cafe with a cold glass of iced tea, and I'm just looking up at this town hall, and I've got my mop head brush loaded with some intense blue, some phthalo blue from Daniel Smith, but I've also mixed in some remnants of some intense blue calligraphy ink. You'll see the bottle on the table at the top there, which is from Liquid Draw. This is the kind of thing which most people would see no value in, mixing watercolour and ink literally to create a different kind of blue. And there's no reason to do it other than to kind of surprise yourself, literally to throw a curveball into your process, just so you feel fresh and you feel surprised by whatever you do. So the fact I had a little bit of this blue already in my palette was, okay, fine, let's add this in, let's kind of combine it. I don't like wasting paints, so if I've got some kind of dried watercolor or dried ink in my palette, then I'll use it again. I'll use it till it's gone, because I think that's kind of part of the fate of urban sketching. It's a very non-wasteful process. I mean, I've been known to do a sketch on a painting and then I'll turn the paper over and paint on the back. Now that's because I don't see the sketch or the painting as having value, he said, with inverted commas, meaning it's not like a precious thing where after you've drawn it you keep it somewhere, as if it's got some kind of historical value or some kind of archival importance. That's another point. I often get people talking about the archival quality of papers and of paints, and I'm simply not interested. It's just a sketch. That's the point of the sketch. Whether this ink and watercolor blend lasts 100 years or 20 years, I don't care. That simply would get in the way. To even think that thought would add a layer of sort of pressure into what you're thinking about, because it just gets in the way of the act of capturing the moment. The moment is something ephemeral. If you flip your mood a bit, if something bad happens, you stub your toe, as it were, metaphysically, you can put yourself off and the drawing doesn't happen. So it's really important to not let, for me anyway, to not let anything get in the way in my head that's anything other than the joy of laying down the colours. Now you'll see I've laid down this without any guidelines. I'm just going straight in there, and the drawing at the end looks really charming, and it's a sort of representation of that rat house. But if you do compare it to the photograph, it is not in any way an accurate representation of the specific sort of view I was doing. If I'd had that photograph and I'd sat down and copied the photograph out, it would have been obviously a more accurate drawing, but it would have been a job of work. I'd been doing it for kind of, I don't know what reasons. The act of sitting in a cafe and drawing frees you from the kind of tyranny of accuracy and allows you to be sort of careless with your proportions for your own personal pleasure. And it frees you from that sense of responsibility to be precise in any way, because it's a sketch. That's the whole banging on point about a sketch as opposed to something artistic, or a drawing or illustration, all these words which imply a greater level of precision. Then once I've laid down my blues, which are really kind of the structure and the sort of tonal balance, they bring shadows, I'm then going in with the Arts acrylic pen. Now this is actually this Arts, I call them Arts, it's Artex, isn't it? Artex. They were my first ever acrylic pen brand, I think. The first one I bought in any bulk. You can buy them in sets of 36, and they're just such a friendly pen. I've tried different pens, and I have now lots of different acrylic pens. There's lots of variations. But to be honest, if I had to advise someone buy a set of acrylic paint pens, brush style pens, I think it would be these, because they're incredibly friendly and reliable, and they've never let me down, and I'll always have 3 or 4 in my bag. Now, of course, the negative of the acrylic pen is one pen, one colour. So when you do a trip like I'm doing here, how many pens do you take? I mean, how big is your bag going to be, kind of thing. So I think I took about 6 different colours based on what I felt I might, what I might use. And they were all basically stone colours. I didn't take any kind of greens. And then I'm relying on white and tonal paper to bring a lot of the kind of definition and the drama to the drawing. And of course I've got the watercolour set, which I can mix, even though I still didn't have a green in there. I had to mix a green with blues and yellows, but still you get the point. As long as you've got a watercolour set and you've got your black, white and your strong colour, in this case for this series of paintings it's blue, and as long as you've got your tonal paper, you're there, really. You're just bringing colour in because you want to, it's a terracotta colour building, so I've got a pen that's near enough that I can give it something of that colour, and so that that pleases me. But it's amazing how little of that paint pen you need to bring in order to kind of make the drawing feel as if it's a coloured drawing, even though it's actually really relatively tonal. I mean, there's not a lot of colour going on. I think I'd actually go even further and say that if somebody was starting out sketching like this, I think I'd suggest to them, grab yourself 3 or 4 paint pens, maybe some watercolours, but a tiny set, and some tonal paper, and don't worry about what colours you choose. Almost, get yourself, imagine you're walking along the beach, there's rain, or the waves have come up and washed all the pebbles on the beach. Imagine the colours of the pebbles on the beach. Those are the colours of the pens you want, because they're the colours of stone. They're the colours of that blue slate, or red sandstone, or yellow stones, limestones. You want to imagine that the colours in your bag represent the built environment, and the built environment is built of stones and bricks. If you add a blue in for that for metals, you're kind of 90% there. What you don't want to do is buy yourself a big set of 36 pens, for example, and carry them around with you, because that sense of sitting in front of a view with a massive row of pens in front of you, kind of thinking, oh my god, which colour shall I pick to do that? And that all just kills the mood somehow. You want to feel as if there's a sense of limitation that triggers an artistic response in you. I've got to be careful using the word artistic, aren't I? I'm a big believer in urban sketching not being an artistic act in the same way as, as art is. But still, I'm digressing. The point is, if you restrict your tools, then you restrict your confusion. You don't have to spend time thinking about a choice. It just becomes, well, this is the reddest pen I have. This is the pen I'm going to use. End of. And it's amazing how you can achieve really interesting results. I mean, even if you just have two colours, if you just had this blue and white, for example, on the grey tone, you could really enjoy the drawing. It would be a drawing you would be happy with, because it takes away some of the complication, and because of that it frees up the rest of the process, and you could enjoy that process more because of it. So if you're new to this world, give that a go. A piece of grey paper, even if it's just blue and white like this, I guarantee you'll enjoy something about it, and you'll learn a lot. And that's the ultimate goal of every drawing we ever draw, really. It's not to end up with the end result. The end result is kind of irrelevant. I mean, I could be overly romantic, but I could theoretically draw this painting and walk away and leave it on the cafe table as a kind of, I don't know, a gift to the cafe owner. Because it doesn't have value to me in that sense. The value was in the creation of it, not in it itself as an end product. As an end product, it's just like a memory. It's a bit like, at least I feel this, maybe you don't, but it's a bit like when you take a photograph. I remember taking the photograph, specifically when you're looking, the old school kind of photograph where you're looking through a viewfinder. That sense of looking at the view and pressing the button is the thing I remember. And who actually goes back and looks through all their photographs and sort of remembers through the actual looking back at the photograph? Well, maybe millions do, but I don't. That doesn't seem to be necessary, because the act of taking the photograph was the thing I remember. So it's kind of fixed in my head in some way because of that. So we're getting well into the drawing now, and I decide to play a bit more on that watercolour. I'm using my angled shader, which is my recommended sort of brush along with the mop. Those two brushes can do an awful lot. I do actually, on this trip, I have a couple of different angled shaders in terms of sizes, a 5 and a 3, I think, just to kind of give myself, I don't know, just in case I need to get fine. But it doesn't really matter, because they're such adaptable brushes. You can do an awful lot with them, as you see here. Just with the same brush, because it's a relatively big-ish brush, it's not like a super fine, you can pick up quite a lot of pigment, quite a lot of paint, quite a lot of colour in the actual brushes, the actual hairs. So you can kind of use it like sort of like an ink pen, where you dip it and then you can use it for multiple strokes in all different ways and all different kinds of manners to kind of get lots of different benefits on your drawing. And you can see that little bits of, bringing in some highlights of some colours and, little touches here and there is really just my way of enjoying the last 10 minutes of a drawing. I mean, the drawing's basically done. I could have stopped. But I enjoy that point where you think, okay, this has worked. Proportionately, it's fine. It's sitting on the page okay. And, I can enjoy now just flourishes, little touching bits, little moments where you just give it a bit more something. That's a really, really happy stage of a drawing. And in fact, you can kind of wallow in that for quite a while. You could spend half an hour just enjoying the last 10 minutes. Does that make sense? Because you're extending it, instead of rushing to the end and saying this is now finished. That's one of the benefits of not having a fixed style, is that by not having a fixed style, you're not kind of reaching a known conclusion. You're allowing yourself to be relatively playful as far as, whether you add a sky or whether you do a ground or whatever it might be. Now, one of the questions I get asked a lot is, where do you start? By which I mean, physically on the page, where do you start? And specifically, if you're not using any kind of guideline, you're not going to use a pencil to lay down some sort of loose guides. And if you were to rerun this video, you'd find that what I started with, and it's instinctive, it's not something I think about, but what I start with is the thing that matters most in my eyes. And the thing that matters most is the clock tower. So what I don't want to do is create a lovely painting, drawing, sketch of this town hall, and yet the clock tower is half off the top of the page, or over to one side too much, or it looks offset or incorrectly positioned. That would be annoying, to create a good drawing but the thing that mattered most to me is in the wrong position. So the first thing I'm doing is I'm positioning the thing that matters most. So in the case of this drawing, I drew that clock tower first, and as quickly as I could, using the mop brush, I kind of masked in where it was, and then within a minute or so, I wanted to get to sort of a vertical line to the ground and then find out where that ground line was. So basically what I'm trying to do is position the drawing on the page. That's the trick. It is of course very doable to create a drawing just of the detail you want and not worry about the entirety of the drawing. That's fine. But most of my drawings, I try to do the entirety of a building, and therefore it has a top and a bottom, and I like to put the top of the bottom on the page, to see it visually, to not have it running off the edge. I don't matter so much about the sides, but I worry about the top and the bottom. So if that's, for me, is, it's not the key, but it's the thing that instinctively is in my head for the first 2 minutes of a drawing. Let's make sure this thing fits. And let's make sure that I know where people are looking, and let's make sure that I know I've done that good enough, because it would be possible. And there's a couple of drawings I've done in the last few years where I start the drawing or painting or sketch or whatever, and I've literally drawn 3 or 4 lines, and I just know I want that over to the left more, and I can either correct it by scrubbing it out, by washing over the top, or in some cases I'll even just flip the paper over, because obviously grey paper like this or any other tonal or coloured paper, it's the same colour on both sides, so you can literally flip it over to the other side and just quickly start again. I did a church in Portugal once which was exactly that. I put like 6 or 7 strong lines down, and I just thought this needs to be over to the right a bit more, and I just flipped the paper over and then put it straight down in the right position. And that's a really relaxing, refreshing thing to have as a kind of get out of jail card, as a I know I can do that at any point moment. So because you have that kind of sort of get out of the problem idea, you'll often find you don't need to use it, because it's the act of having that security blanket in position means you don't need it. Now, I'm deciding to put a sky in here, largely because I'm enjoying the drawing so much. And rather than do my usual blue, because the building is blue, even though it's an incredibly blue sky day, so I'd have every reason to do a blue sky, perversely I've decided to do a white sky, because I want the only blue in this drawing to be the blue of the building itself. It's just a bit of artistic license, I guess, but I'm specifically going in with a very wet watercolour wash, and I've the one fluid paint, the one tube of paint I've brought with me is white watercolour. You'll see it there on the table beside me, specifically for moments like this where I want to lay down a lot of white, like kind of a cloud bank or something like that. And in this case, because the white of the sky is a bit intense, I'm going to put that same white onto the facade of that building as well, and touch a few points here and there. It's one of my little tricks. If whatever colour I do the sky, I'll have little reflections of that colour elsewhere, just to stop the sky from looking isolated and kind of a bit, weirdly different at the top of the sheet. I'll have a few touches of the same style of colour elsewhere, just to help it bed in a bit. So you'll see me putting some what looks like basically sky colour now on the ground, and that's to create that kind of visual bridging, so the eye sees the thing as a whole. Now I've obviously got a little bit too much time here because I've got another iced tea coming. So yeah, okay, let's get some really fine line in. Posca is the most famous brand of acrylic brush pen, and I came to Posca very late. I guess I was a bit snobby about them. I liked the cheap brands that were brush heads, brush tips, and Poscas are quite expensive. And just recently I've tried a couple, just because everybody goes on about them. And I'm trying this very ultra fine, it's kind of a 0.7, and it's fine. I bought 2 blues and 2 whites and 2 blacks, I think, so only kind of 3 colours specifically to bring with me on this trip, just to try them out, to see how I felt about them. And in fairness, you know, they're fine. As I say, I wasn't over enamoured, although the colours are nice. They take a lot of shaking, which is something I'm not used to with some of my other paint pens, which don't take much shaking at all. Posca's seem to be mixed because it can come out very watery at first, which is unpleasant. So it really does need to be, you know, shaken hard. So if you're the kind of person who doesn't want to, you know, stand in the middle of the street shaking your pens up and down like a loony, they may not be your best choice. I do find that part of the joy for me is exploring different pens, different tools, because pens are super cheap. You know, pens are £1 or €1 or $1 or $2, and if you buy sets, you know, $20, £20, €20 buys you 30 pens. So it's not the kind of thing where I feel embarrassed to buy another pen, you know, here and there, especially if I'm only, in this case, literally buying one pen. It's just a way of exploring and experimenting and giving yourself a little surprise. So I also don't mind if I don't like the pen. It's not as if I've invested in it, you know. I'm not emotionally invested or financially invested in a whole load of pens. It's okay for me to kind of think, yeah, it's good enough. So here we are. Here's the final piece. There's my iced tea, all drunk. And it was a really fun day, an incredibly hot day, as I say. But I think the drawing's got a charm to it, and I think it's because of the restricted colour palette. I'd probably, if I did it again, not put that orange in. Looking back at it, it seems a bit too shouty. But the colours and the subtlety and the sort of blurriness feels appropriate for the period, you know, for this very, very old building. And I think there's a real joy in it. And ultimately, it's the town hall. So I guess if I was to, I don't know, set you a task for the week, I'm thinking here of Monty Don and Gardener's World, if you know what I'm talking about. But the task for the week, why not go and draw your town hall? At least give it a little sketch, you know?